Hi Derek, welcome to join me there this morning. Appreciate your time. I'm sure you're a very busy man at the moment with all the HR issues going on.
Yeah, well, look, there's plenty of change still going on and plenty of change still anticipated, I think, across the board for employers and employees alike for the rest of the year. It seems to be a bit of a moving target at the moment in terms of kind of what businesses can or cannot do at the moment. But I think we're all trying to manage it at this time.
Certainly true. And I mean, we did talk there, God, 6-8 months ago. I didn't think the conversation I was going to have with you today would be on the same note. I mean, we're a year on, right?
Yeah.
Staff are still working remotely. I suppose what's your view of the future in that arena?
Yeah, well, look, I probably take my notes out from a year ago and we could do the same session because, look, some things have changed, some things haven't changed, as you rightly point out, Stephanie. The remote working side of things is obviously still in place for organizations out of requirement rather than decision, at the moment. And we got to expect that's going to change over time in terms of the ability of organizations to request their employees to come back to offices or their place of work as restrictions get eased. But I do think that employers now are absolutely having to consider how they work in the future. Is it going to be a more flexible blended approach, or is the office going to ever be the same again for what they had in the past?
I've got I think certainly the blended. I think that's probably more on the cards. All right. I don't personally see the gains of people being out of that community long term. I mean, we're coming around. Well, I'll say we're coming around to the easing of restrictions.
Well, so what do you know that I don't know? Thanks.
Yeah. So depending on when people play this video, I suppose what do we see, or what do you think, in your personal opinion, the impact of this employment or unemployment levels are going to be?
I think it's all linked to, I suppose, certain decisions that government are going to make. It's going to impact the economy. So, look, I think a lot of decisions haven't yet been made by employers at the moment because there's still quite a number of supports in place, and rightly so, for employers that we know can't go on indefinitely. So I think employers have been able to push decisions down the road, such as whether they're going to go back to an office based, whether they're going to go remote working. And even on that, like, the government have made their signals very clear through a remote working strategy to come into legislation, and a right to disconnect. So there's definitely that appetite is going to, I suppose, remain in place for the future with employees' expectations as well. But when we look at, I suppose, the employment side of things, and the numbers haven't gone, I think, as badly as we would have, well, probably when we talked 6-7 months ago, that there was expected to be significantly higher levels of unemployment. I know it's about 25% COVID related, but when you kind of dig down, it's probably closer to about 6%, whereas all the previous trajectories or considerations were probably we would be at the 10, 11, type 12% even. So in a positive way, that hasn't reached the double digits on unemployment. But I do think, and we're seeing it on the ground, decisions are coming through, be it individual or collective redundancies are starting to feed through. And because certain sectors, they've just run out of road, run out of runway. And it's not just their business, it's they might be providing a service to someone else. And because that service has changed, it's the knock-on effects to them. So we definitely expect, unfortunately, more redundancies happen throughout the year. And secondly, I think arising out of that, which I suppose my employment law hat on, that leads to disputes, that leads to claims, Workplace Relations Commission, Labour Court, and that takes valuable time, energy, effort, and financials usually for companies to effectively manage. So if I'd say anything today, is that companies need to plan well. They need to forecast and future forecast what decisions they may need to make when it comes to resourcing, and not end up in a rushed decision to say, well, we didn't see the government supports ending, so all of a sudden we're going to have to start looking at our cost of staff. We know that's going to happen. So now you can scenario it, and at what time what's the D-Day that you have to make any sort of decision, if you do, around managing your cost base.
And our clients actually, I suppose, thinking about their handbooks, is that an area that we're a little bit lax on? We create them at the once off, and then they get tucked into the bookshelf. And
Oh, no.
is this a time that we should be bringing it back to the forefront?
Well, I think that they act as a good book stop, is it, or on the shelf for many organizations, and dust them off. And actually, I won't digress too far, but I remember going into an organization and we were talking about their needs and their handbooks, and they're like, yes, we need to get one in place, etc., etc. And one of the people in the meeting go, wait a minute, did we not do one a while back? And they looked around and surely they pulled something off the shelf, and the other manager goes, I've never seen that. When did we do that? So it's not uncommon that the handbooks get done and left, or they get left in draft format, which is the worst thing to have. So the challenge for organizations is, look, the handbook, policies, procedures, it's a live document. Because what happens then if a decision gets made, be it an issue arises and everyone looks for the policy and procedure, or they looking at redundancies, and there may be a redundancy policy that they've committed to following a last in, first out rule. So the handbook should never be, I suppose, that, you know, a doorstop or a book stop, that it needs to be live. Now, there's been some recent changes, a very relevant change for organizations. The code of practice on bullying did change start this year, and there's fundamental differences in procedure that organizations are required to do. So if nothing else, if people are hearing this today, and I know when I say, well, we've enough on our plate, I'd say, I know people do, but what you don't want on your plate is an outdated policy that you're following in with good intention, and you fall at a later hurdle as someone says, but you missed a step, because the code of practice is live, it is there for everyone to see. So I think probably not many organizations are going off saying, let's revise our handbook and do everything like that. But equally, you know, it doesn't take a lot to dust it off, check to see what's there, familiarize yourself, and make some changes to it, because you're not fundamentally going out to change people's terms and conditions. What you're doing is making sure it's legislatively compliant. And the only other point I'd say on that as well is that, you know, we started off the conversation about remote working, and arguably we're still in this interim period. There's very few organizations who've said we are remote going forward, hence we're changing your T's and C's. What they're saying is we're still in this interim period. So, you know, interim remote working policy, even if it's not written down, is in place. If they go to change that to say from now on, Steph, you're able to work 2 days a week, Derek, you're going to be 3 days a week, that has knock-on effects in terms of place of work, availability. You know, you work from home maybe on a Friday, but now I need you in for a meeting. And you're saying, well, Friday's my day from home. So they really need to think through any sort of policy and not sleepwalk into a set of practices that don't meet the business requirements in the future.
Well, that certainly sounds like one headache, because I think what you've quite rightly stepped us through there is that remote working and COVID driven and starting going, oh, just everybody go home and be safe, has now become a legislation that is going to affect potentially T's and C's, an organization, what they're paying for. I mean, there's more around that than just a simple, let's all run off to home to work and be safe.
Yeah, and it's worked well. I think, look, everyone, employers, employees, unions, like everyone has worked together because they, you know, there's no choice. But as I've said a number of months ago, you know, the goodwill in terms of expected and otherwise has run its course, and people are still doing it, but you can't expect it on an ongoing basis. And organizations need to make decisions, and employees need to know the lie of the land. They need to know, like, what's the plans. And you know, any such decisions where I know organizations that they might be Dublin based or Cork based, and their employees are living in a different county now. They've gone home, you know, to Galway or wherever it might be. And that works well. It works fine in a remote environment. But, you know, is that employee then expected in September or whatever time frame to start going back in the office? And if that's 3 days a week, that's a big commute, you know, from them. So there's a lot of those decisions. And we've talked to organizations recently as well who are thinking, we are going to allow employees to work from home, and that'll be their place of work. So ultimately then, if they start traveling then to the office, arguably, Is there, sure,
Yeah,
better with the mileage, the revenue, all that sort of
yeah,
stuff to
yeah.
start. And that's why I said don't sleepwalk into these sort of things that you think it's right. You need to trash out the scenarios that will happen, not may happen, they will happen at some stage.
Oh, Derek, you're frightening the life out of me again.
Well, that's my job. No, look, I
No,
think
genuinely,
yeah.
I think your sleepwalking is probably, you coined it there perfectly. I think we have some expectations about things, and I mean, you could have kept talking there, and we could have been trying to solve housing crisis there in relation to change of
Yeah,
place of work. So I
yeah,
mean, I think that's a big lesson though, and I think that's one of the things that we need to take very seriously from this chat here today, is
yeah.
that there is so much change, whether it's T's and C's, whether it's location, handbooks,
Mm.
any of those things. We need to kind of start putting our hand up and putting it in as much a priority as everything else we're doing around the business.
Yeah, because we're out of crisis management phase, which we were probably when we talked a number of months back. So, the government have clearly signaled that when they put the legislation in place, employees will have a right to request remote working. Not a right to remote working, a right to request remote working. But equally, employers are going to be faced with, well, what is potentially a business decision not to allow someone to remote work, and how do you do so in a fair and equitable manner, and all those sort of things. So that is ahead of us this year, and the time is now to start thinking and scenarioing some of these things as well, because look, employees are going to have expectations, and they might differ from I can't wait to get back into the office to the I don't see myself ever coming back into an office. So like a lot of organizations have been doing kind of pulse surveys and keeping in contact and understanding what expectations are, and equally sometimes setting those expectations to say, well, we are keeping an office here and that will still be our place of work. However, we will consider more flexible practice in the future to be decided upon. But we're getting closer and closer to that decision to be decided upon. And you don't make those decisions in an hour. You tease it out with your colleagues, your senior staff, and talk to the likes of ourselves. So look in terms of the effects from tax, all those sort of things, and put then, I suppose, a robust process in place, and even a pilot to the point to say as well, let's trial this now under this more permanent arrangement, if we call it, than the current interim arrangement. But we want to see if for the next 6 months is it working? Because if it's not, you want to reserve the right to I suppose get back to a way of working. But I always say good employees will work anywhere. They'd be in a hotel lobby with a laptop and a phone, and you wouldn't even know because their output isn't affected. So I think trust, obviously, is, as we know, is the number one factor around anything remote working. But employers have to have that trust. And once performance productivity is at the levels, then not to get caught up in the presenteeism element of it, be it even at home or in the office. And that's a mindset kind of change, I think, still for employers.
I think actually somebody like yourselves there coming in and chatting to probably employers and being desensitizing that situation and asking those difficult questions that maybe where an employer has to adjust their own thinking. As you say, is it, let's start measuring productivity, not being present. But no, look, there's a lot there. I've got a funny feeling we'll be talking in 6 months' time again, with more legislation probably coming down the road. But Derek, look, you're very kind. I know our audience are needing this information, whether they like the information. But certainly they'll be in touch. If you don't mind, I'm going to put your contact details on at the end of the video, if that's all right. If they can get in touch, you're the expert. No point in calling me.
Yeah, look, I'm always happy to have a chat with someone. It costs nothing to have a chat and prevent someone going down a rabbit hole where it's very difficult to come out. So look, it costs nothing to signpost somebody in the right direction. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you there. Listen, thank you very much for your time. Great, and we'll catch up soon.
Brilliant. Great to talk to you. Thanks again.
Video.